I'm in now, people, sorry.
I mean,
She's still
Rebecca's
connecting.
here? Okay.
Yep. Are you there, Rebecca?
I'm in. Herb, are you
All
up?
right.
Yeah, we're streaming, yes.
We're streaming.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, then I'd like to call the curriculum committee meeting together and ask for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right. And do we have any public input on the agenda? Anyone there, Rebecca?
There are no new emails, but there was one sent earlier that was shared with all you that should be mentioned for the agenda.
Right, and so I think if it's okay with the committee, what I would like to do would be to share my screen, and that would allow me to bring up the email that was submitted as public comment. We haven't had a lot of public comment during this period. Does that sound okay, Randy?
I think it's fine. I just don't want to send publicly out her email over the Zoom.
Okay. So I will see.
I think what we can do.
No, good point. Good point. Don't want to. Yeah.
So I think you can just mention that who submitted it and generally what the thoughts were, and then what we will do is, I think all the board members received it, and we can enter it into the minutes as we create those officially. But if you want to summarize generally what the comments were, Tim, if you're able to, I think that would be appropriate.
So, for public comment, the committee received an email from Michelle Berg. Michelle, I think you all know very well. She is a member of our Human Growth and Development Committee. She's been a key contributor to the work of the committee. And she had, 3 interrelated themes in her email that she wanted to encourage the committee to consider as you move on to the human growth and development topic on your agenda. Her first was a point which I also referenced in the notes for the meeting today, which is the Human Growth and Development Advisory Committee invested considerable time in the last year working on updating, coming up with recommendations to update the scope and sequence of what is covered in our Human Growth and Development Program. One aspect of our Human Growth and Development Handbook the committee did not spend time on during its work so far was a philosophy statement that is at the front of the handbook. And just like the scope and sequence had not been visited in quite some time, that is true with the philosophy statement as well. So one of Michelle's points was expressing a desire that the committee come back and look to that. And so that was her one point. She also had 2 related points referencing the way the Elmbrook School District in Waukesha County approaches their human growth and development program. And Elmbrook was a district that we looked at in terms of how they organized their communications and really had some good transparency with their stakeholders. And Michelle's points are, first, that they actually have a formal policy fully focused as a board policy on human growth and development. Now, for us, human growth and development is touched upon in some of our policies, but we don't have a dedicated human growth and development policy quite the way Elmbrook does.
Tim, that's not really correct. Policy 34134 is actually human growth and development. It's a top title.
Mm-hmm.
It's listed under, I think, life education or something like that, but that's it is a very specific. And then we have 341-3 rule, which specifies about parental outing and declining to have your kids educated in the human growth and development. So we do have a policy in a statement in the policy book. It's not as comprehensive as Elmbrook's.
Yes, thanks for that clarification, Mark. And, one aspect of Elmbrook's policy, which is a much more detailed and encompassing policy than the one we currently have had, is that it does get into that question of review of materials. And, we have had some, dialogue around adoption of textbooks and major resources and what kind of review occurs around instructional materials. In Elmbrook, at least in their human growth and development policy, there is an actual provision for review of instructional materials that we currently don't have. Michelle wanted to call that, to the committee's attention. And so I think those are the kind of the main points of her email, but you all did receive it. And Mark, thank you for clarifying on our policy there. And Rebecca, that's our only comment, correct?
Correct, that's the only comment.
Okay.
Okay.
So what I would like to do, if it's okay with you, Julie, is go to sharing the screen, and I'll bring up Board Book for the public.
Okay. Okay.
And can everybody see Board Book on my system now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. And so we'll just move over. So public input on the agenda. The next item is actually the human growth and development scope and sequence, recommendations. And again, this is a committee that was formed more than a year ago. They've put in a lot of work, and they, on their March 3rd meeting, did come up with recommendations. And there are two attachments in Board Book. One are the learning targets from the most recent revision in 2008. And then the one titled Waunakee Scope and Sequence Learning Targets March 3 Draft contains the committee's recommendation. And these are pretty substantial. The changes are in red. And in general, there was a desire to be responsive to the input that we had on the needs assessments we conducted from parents, students, the review of standards. There was a desire to look at updating content in a variety of areas, certainly in the areas of reproduction, contraception, also in areas of personal respect, areas related to social media use, issues related to power disparities in relationships and grooming, quite a large set of recommendations. And some of these would be updating where we already offer learning. In some cases, we would have to look at maybe through the homeroom structure in some grade levels, and maybe working with some of our pupil services staff or homeroom teachers to add some coverage where we haven't been including coverage in recent years. There's a lot in here. I will say it's something the committee did reach consensus on after a very long period of time. And so in terms of their work on the scope and sequence, they've done their job. Now we want this committee to kind of come back and provide feedback on implementation and potentially look at that philosophy statement. But the next step in the process is for you as a curriculum committee to consider their recommendations and whether you want to make modifications to those or whether you want to recommend them to the full board as is. You have the flexibility to do either. These are significant changes. These are the first updates to the scope and sequence in 12 years, and probably the first major change to the scope and sequence and the generation. So this is significant. You could decide to move it all through tonight. You certainly, given the scope of the changes, could decide to deliberate on it tonight and bring it back at another meeting for committee action. You know, kind of with that, I think I would like to step back and, you know, if as the committee you would like to kind of discuss your reactions to what you saw from the advisory committee.
Well, I thought it was a very comprehensive update of everything, the different areas. I haven't found anything glaring areas that I have concerns about. Does anyone else?
It would have been nice to hear from someone from the instructional staff or administrative staff, their perspective on these things. I mean, I can look at them and say, to me, it looks great. Mm-hmm. I know we had administration and teachers on the ad hoc committee, so it would have been, but I think it would have been great to get their take on this change. Maybe their, at least their endorsement of it.
Tim.
So Mark, we had the administrative rep initially was Janet Thomas, and I came in after Janet as the administrative rep on the committee. We had one instructional representative, that was Brenda Murdy, who's a 4th grade teacher at Arboretum. And those were really the two staff members on the committee due to the statutory requirements on ratios for the committee. I can tell you that these are consensus recommendations. You know, Brenda and I would both, of the committee, Brenda and I would both support these. But I mean, I do think, you know, if you were to compare the way the committee structure is today versus the way it was in the past you would have a committee where most of the instructors, there'd be representation with many instructors for just about every course or grade level where human growth and development instruction occurred. With the statutory changes that came in about a decade ago, to keep the committee, the advisory committee, I should say, at not too large a size, we ended up with 2 staff reps, 1 administrator and 1 teacher.
That's a you know, I was on the committee when it started, mm-hmm. And I had the impression there was going to be more teachers on it than 1. And then when I saw Elmbrook's program where they have 3 teachers on it, 1 from each grade level, I just assumed there would have been more staff input. And I know how family sensitive this is, and we certainly need to respond to the families' values in the community, but I feel awkward, at least, saying to the teaching staff, here's a scope and sequence you didn't create that you're going to have to use. Mm-hmm. We don't do that for any other curriculum.
That is correct.
And so, personally, I guess before we would ask board approval on it, I'd like to see the staff who are going to have to implement this look at it and get their feedback on it, including the building principals with whom the curriculum is going to be taught it.
Mm-hmm.
Tim,
yeah, I mean, go ahead, Joan, I'm sorry.
Where does it go next? Who fills in the details? I mean, we have these large statements and you know, where are the details and who comes together to fill them in? And there's a couple questions I have that I'm assuming in grades 1st I don't think there's any kindergarten, is there?
Actually, there is.
There
Okay.
is, but it's pretty limited.
Very
Okay,
limited.
so in K through 6, is it taught by homeroom teachers?
Mostly.
Okay, so mostly then I'd like to know where else it's taught. Is it always taught co-ed, or is there some division at some parts?
So, a lot of the time when we think about human growth and development, we always think about the topics that are probably the most sensitive, that attract the most attention, which is human development, human reproduction. And those topics are taught by, in the lower grades, when it comes in, the homeroom teacher. And what we have done historically is beginning at 4th grade, there is some separation and differentiation among the students, with a male teacher or teachers taking the boys, and the female teachers working with the girls, and that's a 4th grade aspect. There are other aspects that relate to harassment, safety, technology use, personal self-concept, that are not part of what's provided by the homeroom teacher. They would typically be provided through the developmental guidance program that's facilitated by the school counselor. So that's the primary other person. Now, what happens in some cases, just depending on 4th grade, for example, Joan, the composition of the faculty, some of our 4th grade teams have a male teacher on the 4th grade team. Other 4th grade teams do not, in which case you might have another teacher in the building, ed, sometimes the principal. They might play a role in the provision of that part of the unit where you do separate the students.
Is 4th grade the only grade we separate students?
It is with the content we have in there right now, yes.
Will it change moving forward?
Well, the scope and sequence don't speak to that. And this gets to your question on what are the next steps. So what would happen with the details would be, it would go to whatever you as a committee decide to do with this, it'll go next to the full board. Once the full board adopts whatever the final scope and sequence product is, it would then go to our teachers in the grade levels and the courses that actually have these learning targets. And then they would update their units, they would create new lessons where needed, and they would select new materials where needed. And, historically, that's something that has not been addressed in too prescriptive a detail in our handbook. Given the nature of the changes and given the way, this is the first time we've revised human growth and development under the state statute revisions. In the past, you would have a lot of those teachers as part of the committee, and you would have some informal review of the units occurring at the committee level by teachers who are on the committee who are also teachers of the scope and sequence. Nowadays, that's not really an option. Now, some districts don't, keep the committee at a reasonable size and don't appoint many more staff members than we do, but they liberally bring in staff on a technical basis to participate in the meetings, but not as full members of the committee. That's not how we chose to structure our process this time. I do think, having gone through it, that's something that I would envision as the committee continues their work next year. We would ask those teachers to come in and interact with the committee around how they were implementing the updates, give the committee a chance to understand that better, potentially make recommendations for further revisions. But the way we were currently set up, we did not have, we had staff surveys. There were meetings with staff at the very beginning of the process to get a needs assessment of where we needed the most significant updates, but they didn't participate in the committee process in the way that they have in the past, primarily due to how the statute had changed. But I do think, having sat through this process and helped facilitate it and been a member of the committee in the last several months, I do think what some districts have done, which is having staff participate on a non-voting basis, is probably a way we could approach it.
I kind of agree with Mark. I feel really ill-equipped to do anything but approve this, but I respect the process. I respect having a medical profession, a clergy, a parent, a staff member. I really respect the process, and I know how diligently they worked, but you give me this, 13-page list of scope and sequence, and I have to say without the details and without staff input, I don't really know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
If we approve this and they start to develop the curriculum, and then they come back after they've taught it for a while or attempted to teach it or use the materials, is there a way to change it then, or where does the process go?
Well, what I would envision happening is, and I've made reference to this before, is I see us keeping the advisory committee in an active status. We will have to replace some graduating seniors, but I see the committee continuing to meet next year. I would suggest we ask them to look at that philosophy statement, and I would envision the teachers coming back on probably a grade level and course basis, maybe 2 or 3 a meeting next year, to kind of review the changes and how the implementation is being approached with the committee. And if the committee feels comfortable with that direction, that would be something the committee could speak to. If the committee said, was hearing about implementation and maybe seeing some needs for further modification of the scope and sequence, then I could see additional tweaks coming forward to this committee and then to the full board. So that's kind of what, having watched this, what I had been thinking for next year. I mean, another option would be to send this back to the committee and say we would like to schedule in all the teachers before anybody does any curriculum writing to discuss how they might implement these with you, then come back to this committee, then to the full board, and then move on with the process of implementation.
So
Does that give the committee a lot of say in what materials are going to be used? Is that something we want to get into?
Well, it gives the committee feedback. The committee, the way our approach is structured is, first of all, strictly advisory. Ultimately, you as a board make the final decisions on that scope and sequence. Historically, board approval has been reserved for primary resources, things that are smaller scale instructional materials in the way we've traditionally approached things in the district have not required board approval. Now, the public comment you had this evening said human growth and development, it might make sense for that to be an exception. And that's certainly something you as a board could choose to evaluate. But I would say it's an opportunity for feedback, but it's not an opportunity to make decisions the way we are currently structured, Judy.
Tim, I guess maybe it ties in then with the public comment. I don't know if that reflects the board or the advisory committee or just one voice on it. I mean, there's some worthwhile components in what Elmbrook's program. I saw one you provided the committee earlier in the year from the Fox Valley. I forget which school it was, and it was slightly different. And so each community has a slightly different approach. But Elmbrook clearly has a more prescriptive, controlled approach to it, where not only is curriculum approved, but there's no wavering from the specified teaching materials. And in fact, even sub-teachers can't teach the course if the main teacher is missing. I'm not sure we want to get that prescriptive, but if we've got a scope and sequence we're supposed to look at, to me, or approve, it would seem to me that those who have to use it should have input with the committee before the final version comes to us for approval. And I'd like to hear the committee's perspective then as to how specific they might want us to become with this, not just a philosophy program, but a policy. Do they want it? Does the committee recommend a more structured approach? And if so, then I think that's something that probably moves to policy in terms of that part of it. But the scope and sequence right now, I like your idea of having the teachers look at it first, go to the committee, and then come back to us if there's some changes or modifications.
I mean, our discussions with around Elmbrook and I think it was Kimberly, Mark.
Yes.
Back in the winter, weren't on Elmbrook's policies per se. One aspect that had come up in our parent needs assessment and in the view of the committee was a recognition that, and again, our materials have not been, I mean, they were last revised in 2008, but they were not substantially revised since sometime in the 1990s. That our main mechanism for sharing with parents what was covered was a statement in our public notices on the website, a letter that went home to parents that said, if you have questions, please here's what's being covered. You have the right to opt your child out, and if you'd like to have a better understanding of what specifically is going to be used in the instruction of your child on this topic, please contact the teacher. And in the 1990s, that's probably what you had to do. But the thinking was in 2020, as we looked at an Elmbrook or a Kimberly and some of the others, why not put the materials more available on the website, or at least put the full scope and sequence on the website? I mean, until at some point this winter, our handbook from 2008 was not publicly available on the website. So the committee's interest on that was just a desire to modernize our transparency of the materials. We didn't really get into the Elmbrook policy. Now, obviously, different committee members looked at the Elmbrook stuff pretty carefully. I wouldn't want to characterize where the committee stands on the policy and the way Elmbrook approaches materials. I can say the committee liked the way that Elmbrook presented the information to parents and the public on their website.
Okay.
Tim, just a thought. The curriculum committee was consulted and very involved in picking the members of the advisory committee.
Mm-hmm.
We selected individuals who we felt would really be open-minded and collaborative and present point of view. I know that there needs to be board approval, and I'm willing to make board approval with, if it helps to move this forward, but, preliminary approval pending staff recognition or staff approval. You know, we're good with where it's at, or at least I'm good with where it's at, but I agree with Mark. I think that we need some staff input and we need some details to, you know, what comes next. And, you know, I'm happy to approve the statements that were given, but next we need to see some staff input, and before we make this you know, firm document, I would really like to go to the staff. And whether they work with this committee or if they work in isolation and just come back and see how it's blended, you know, I guess I leave that up to you. But it's difficult with our current circumstances to coordinate these large meetings, and I know we just need to move forward. And I think right now we're at a point where our kindergarten team, our first grade team, our grade level teams need to start looking at these statements and start putting some facts to them, that I think then it could come back to us, because that's how curriculum usually comes to us, with teacher recommendation. And I get that we are starting this with a, you know, community endorsement, and I like that. I think that, you know, obviously we needed to do that, but is it appropriate that we have more of a intermediate, you know, board vote and then move it on to the staff before it becomes final?
I think either approach, you know, has definite merits, and I'm not trying to be wishy-washy. I think they both truly have potential advantages. So let me walk through what I see as the advantages and disadvantages for kind of moving the process through to the full board. Scope and sequence has not been revised since 2008, has not been substantially revised since sometime around 92 or 94. It's very dated. It would, moving the process along, I think would begin to allow us to see changes coming in the upcoming year. On the other hand, it would mean that staff put work in, they select some materials, they come back to the advisory committee and say, here's how we've begun to implement the updated scope and sequence that the board has finalized, however close or not close it is to the committee's recommendations, the advisory committee's recommendations. And then there's always the possibility there could be a dialogue that would lead to changes on work that was just already done. And we go back and potentially ask a grade level or a course team to redo some work. Now that might not happen. I mean, people might look at the work and everybody might say, this is really positive, this is consistent with the vision. Thank you for sharing that with us. That certainly is a possible outcome too. So that's what I see as the advantage and the potential complication of kind of stepping it forward. If we were to say, let's say we like what we see here, but before we want to take it up as a committee for a vote, we want teachers who actually teach these topics to engage in some dialogue with the committee. So we're going to remand it back to the advisory committee, not a negative on the work of the committee, but just we want to find a way to work in the staff interaction that wasn't part of the original process design at those meetings. Then realistically, we probably see very few updates take effect in the upcoming school year, which I probably would have had stronger feelings about before our COVID emergency than I do now, because I'm looking at next school year as maybe being a little bit of a different year anyways. So I will say that my thinking has evolved on that a little bit. And it would allow the committee and the teachers to have that interaction up front, and it would reduce the likelihood that there'd be any possibility that somebody might invest in some significant work and then get feedback, and we ask them to go back and make some changes, which, you know, that's always the board's prerogative to do. But as, you know, thinking back to when I was in the classroom, I like to do the work once and know that I was on the right track. So that's what I see as the advantages and disadvantages of either approach. And I would say if this was early March, I would have been a strong proponent for pushing forward, getting the curriculum writing done, and then have the re-engagement with the committee after teachers had done the work. Now that I'm looking at the prospect of the uncertain prospect of exactly what next year is going to look like instructionally, I feel like there might be less downside to kind of engaging the staff now with the committee and aim more at implementation in 21-22.
Can I ask a clarifying question here, Tim?
Yes.
And it's to Joan. I think what I heard Joan say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you were looking at one pathway being a kind of a preliminary approval at the curriculum committee, move it to the full board for preliminary approval, and then take it back to staff, but before it was implemented, wanting it to come back through the process. Is that accurate? That's what you were saying?
Yes.
So I guess if that were the case, then I would say you want to bring it once, as opposed to doing two iterations. If one of the pieces that the committee feels is very important is before we implement anything, wanting that voice of staff, I think then we figure out what that process is that's going to allow for that to occur. Because to have like a preliminary approval really doesn't give us approval to move forward. It's just giving us, it's another step in the process to then get further input to then bring back through. So I just wanted to clarify kind of how you were seeing that part, but my recommendation would be we'd want to try to walk this through kind of because I don't know if the interim guidance really provides any direction to change instruction.
So
I don't, if I'm not reading that right, Joan, please correct me.
No, I think I guess I was just looking at what can move it forward. It kind of saddens me how long this whole process has continued to take. And I don't want to be another roadblock. I don't want to prolong it anymore. I also am uncomfortable without any staff input in kind of prescribing a curriculum that they will be delivering when they haven't been involved. That makes me uncomfortable.
So would your level of comfort, Joan, being taking what you're seeing in front of you, and if there was whatever that process looks like, to get input from the grade level teams and the folks that are delivering this?
That would help me.
And if they said what we see in front of you tonight is in line with what we believe and what we should be doing, that gives you that's the question you're feeling is lacking right now.
Yeah, and that would help me, Randy. I don't need all the details to pass a scope and sequence. That's up to the teachers. But have they even seen this list as it's been drawn up by the advisory committee? And it would help me a lot if this list even went out and we got some feedback from the people delivering this curriculum that, yeah, this is in line with what I think should be happening at these grade levels, that they're the experts. I don't know what a first grader is ready to comprehend.
If I could add, I concur with all of that, Joan. I don't want to discourage the advisory group from all their work. It's just, like I say, be another hurdle. And so what I'm not making a motion, but I would propose that we could give our voice of approval or support for what they've come up with, get that voice from the instructional staff, and then it comes back to us for pushing to the full board for approval at that point. In conjunction with the timing, we're into June. And so realistically, I don't see an urgency we're not going to rush this into next year's curriculum. There's no curriculum writing time, I don't recall, set aside for this in the budget, if I remember right. Maybe I may be wrong on that. With what they're going to have to do to prepare for fall classes, they probably would prefer more time to work to implement this, so that fall of 21 would be the best time to introduce the new scope and sequence and curriculum. So
well, and Mark, I think kind of tracing back, there's a pretty good allotment of curriculum hours to work on this summer.
Okay.
However, our original timeline was the committee made their recommendations on March 3rd. We were going to have a curriculum committee meeting to have the conversation we're having tonight back on March 23rd, so 2 months ago. And so the original timeline
would have worked. But then we ended up with all of the disruption of the COVID emergency.
And so, I think if the committee were to approve it tonight and it were to be approved by the full board in June, we could still carry out implementation, but you wouldn't have the opportunity to hear staff input on it before you adopted it as a board. And then we would be asking staff to go implement it and then come back and have their work reviewed and feedback and maybe recommendations made for adjustment for the next year. And I almost feel with everything that's happened with the timeline having slid some because of the COVID and, kind of what our experience, and again, when this committee was set up, this was the first time we had set up a committee in this new process. And I think, a lot of good thinking went into the composition of the committee and the process. And I think, we've learned some things along the way that we had no way of knowing at the beginning of the work about, 16 months ago or so. So I almost feel like, given where we are on the calendar, I almost feel like it might be just as effective to ask our teachers to meet with the advisory committee over the next few months and discuss the committee's recommendations and what those might look like in practice, and then bring it forward. I mean, regardless of which way we go, there's always the risk that somebody's going to feel that football got moved on them a little bit. The advisory committee kind of did the job that we charged them to do. But at the same time, the way the process was set up, our teaching staff didn't have the kind of say they would have had in past cycles. And that's something that we want to see happen.
What are the chances of getting any staff input within the next month? 0?
Pretty close to 0.
So so then they can't work on curriculum. Is that what you're saying?
So I think if we were to go back and have staff work with the committee, that would probably be something that would begin to happen in the late summer or fall. And then, and again, we don't know how meetings can happen. I mean, will these be virtual meetings? Will these be face-to-face meetings? That's a little uncertain. But same thing for curriculum writing. Will curriculum writing this summer be virtual curriculum writing, or will it be, you know, if it's just me writing my course update, it doesn't matter if I'm sitting by myself. But if I'm a team of 2 people or a team of 4 people working on something, face-to-face versus virtual might matter.
So writing curriculum doesn't depend on us approving the scope and sequence?
It would, because any work on these courses would be to update based on an adopted scope and sequence. So we would need to have board level adoption of the updated scope and sequence to really, I think, in good faith, ask teachers to work on curriculum redesigns.
Let me offer this, Tim. So there is time set aside for grade levels to work on some of this summer. That's correct?
Yes, yes.
All right. What if the board, and let's go back to what Joan was talking about. If there were a 2-stage process, so basically for the board to give preliminary approval for the grade level spans to begin working on some of these curricular pieces. At that time, they also were doing a review of these concepts and brought forward to the board at some point later this summer after their curriculum work is done, their feedback on those in addition to some of the work that they were completing this summer. And would that keep it on its time? I'm thinking out loud here, Tim, but would that allow for the review that I think the committee is looking for to get some input, and also then potentially have some abilities to be able to speak to some of the specific things and how we would implement it in the fall?
I like that.
I guess
Go ahead, Joan.
I'm not sure it's necessary for our grade level staff to meet with the committee, the advisory committee. They've made their recommendation. I would just like our teaching staff to look at it, and if they have a question on one of these, bullet points, or if they have a question on that, then maybe somebody go back to the advisory if they don't understand what it means. But I think it's pretty clear what they mean. What I would like to just have a little input on is, I like what Randy said, let them start working on the curriculum, and as they work on it, review the content of what they are being asked to teach at those levels. They're the experts. I would like their insight into this list.
So Joan, so do we approve in advance or after the fact?
That's a good question, Mark.
I have a hard time approving without that piece.
I do too. And if we can move it to curricula, or to the writing process, or to the review process, and the timing is just unfortunate, and the COVID is unfortunate, and we don't get fast turnaround of information, but I think staff input is pretty crucial to this curriculum.
Well, then we're really approving it after staff input, which will come after they've worked with it for a while this summer, and we postpone our approval of the scope and sequence until September.
And I get what Tim said, as a staff member, how much work do you want to put on something that hasn't even been board approved? And that's why I thought, I don't know how.
Aren't we all saying it looks good right now until we know the details, and we're not going to know the details? So we're almost telling the teachers, this is what we like, but are there glitches? And you tell us if there are glitches.
I'm not even saying I like it. I don't know if I don't like it. To me, it looks fine. If you had taken the red out of there, I would have probably said that looks fine. I mean, I read the
Because Mark, you know everything about this content.
Yeah, you bet. And that's the problem. I don't. And
Right.
so that's why, at least if I don't think every teacher has to look, oh, it'd be nice. Maybe every teacher looks at it. They get back to their building level or grade level coordinator, and the grade level people come up with these are the things that, yeah, this all works. Or we have a problem with this area, and then that goes to the committee. I agree. I don't think, why would a teacher want to work on point the third red if most people don't want that, and then the committee will agree with them, yeah, well, we don't need that in there.
So Mark, you think it's sufficient for our approval of this to just send this list, you know, break it apart, here's your kindergarten, well, you should probably send the whole list
K4.
because you need
K4.
to know what comes before and after.
Yeah, I think K4.
Send this list to the staff, and can't we ask for them to just yay or nay and send
Plus or minuses, yes, you know, likes or dislikes.
Yeah. I mean, we still have them kind of collected for the next 10 days. Is that possible? Just to send them this list and get some feedback from them?
You're looking at really kind of a lack of a better word, a survey of the staff for them to give their initial reaction
Yes.
to what
Yes.
you're seeing in front, and
Yeah.
really saying, are these acceptable? Are they unacceptable? And then a comment, do you have any concerns? That's
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
Exactly.
No in-depth survey. No,
No, just,
something simple.
you know, this is what this advisory committee has come up with. The board would like some input before they approve this. Here's your opportunity to, you know, review it and give the board input before they,
For your grade level piece.
yeah. That's sufficient to me. I just would like a teacher eye on this, and I don't have enough expertise on any of these levels to approve.
So a couple things just to clarify. One of the things I want to talk to the board about, Dave and I've had some conversations just about all the pieces that we have moving through the district right now and decision points. We'll be discussing on the 26th at our meeting about including really 2 board meetings every month, just to stay abreast and being able to act efficiently on items as they move forward. So we obviously have a board meeting on June 8th. I will be asking for an additional board meeting in June, just so that we can be responsive to issues coming forward. So if you kind of had that out there, Tim, kind of what's your thought on being able to do, as Joan has prescribed, as potentially a high level kind of yes, no, or comment type survey, and then having something like that, if it's not ready for the June 8th board meeting, something that could come back through a curriculum committee and we could address it at a second board meeting in June.
So I'd be comfortable with that if, in addition to accompanying the survey, maybe if we can wrangle it, I don't know if it'll be feasible, had a meeting for each grade level where they had the opportunity to come in and have some interaction around the process and the thinking behind the recommendations before, if they wanted to, not a mandatory meeting, but if you want to, first grade, come in and let's, you know, look at this and ask any questions, then go complete the survey. I'd be more comfortable if we did something like that. You know, I do want to say for the record that I agree with the staff input aspect here. I am going to endeavor going forward to work that staff input into the actual work of the advisory committee, because the advisory committee did kind of do their work under the parameters we established for them. And I think in hindsight, yes, that would have worked better if we had brought in more staff as we had gone along, as kind of like on a meeting by meeting basis, as like a technical resource to the committee to talk about the program at that particular grade level or in that course. I think that would have probably been a good approach given the role of the advisory committee in this. That would be my goal going forward, is to try to staff consultation in that manner. But I would be comfortable doing the staff survey as long as it's accompanied by that voluntary meeting. And I think we could do that over the next few weeks.
So can we just table this for any motion until we get that input, Tim?
Yes, yes. And I was very clear with the committee. I said, this is a big update. It's the first time in a long time. The committee may dispense with it in one meeting. This might be a multi-meeting process. So I don't think anyone's going to be surprised that this could be a multi-meeting process. Well,
and if you can convey, we really do truly appreciate their efforts, their product. We just want to hear another voice, and then I certainly think we can encourage them to go forward with a philosophy statement, and that in spirit we support what they came up with. We just need another voice.
Exactly.
Great. So we're agreed to table that?
Need a motion for that, I think.
I move we table it as described.
Second.
So moved.
Okay. Next item, instructional planning for 2020, 2021. I'm going to share some information, and I'm sure that Amy and Randy may have some thoughts they want to share on this matter too. Before I get into some of the things that we are looking at, which I want to stress are super tentative for 2020, 2021, I do want to kind of address where we've been for the last 2 months. And the first thing I would say is that I feel that the last 2 months, stepping back and looking at it as a whole, have gone as well as we could have realistically expected it to go. But I want to emphasize that, I think our kids have done great work. There's no question that our teachers have worked very hard and done great work. And the same for support staff and pupil services and administrations, and certainly parents who have been working at home with their children, as extensions of the classroom. Everybody's done their best, but it's what we would call emergency remote learning. It was without the benefit of a lot of planning. And so what we would endeavor to do for 2021 would be different and better than what we've done for the last 2 months. And I say that while wanting to be absolutely clear that I'm extremely proud of the work that everybody's done since spring break on the remote learning. The other thing that I want to say is, to the extent there's anything where you can say we are lucky in what's happened, we're lucky this washed up in our world in 2020. And it didn't happen 10 years ago, and it didn't happen 20 years ago. Because if you think about what remote instruction from spring break to the end of the year would have looked like prior to the technologies we have today, and there's no question, Zoom fatigue is real. A lot of kids, a lot of parents, a lot of educators have concerns with the amount of screen time that's occurred. But without the technologies we have today, we would not have had the success that we've had over the last 2 months. It would have been very much more difficult. And I also, want to take a moment to make sure you as a board are aware of how providential some decisions you made as a board over the last few years have been in positioning us for some of the successes we've had. And my screen is being shared. I'm just going to show you one little thing in particular. And you will remember when we moved to one-to-one, we also added the Schoology learning management system at the middle school and high school. And we did surveys at the beginning of this process as we were in the spring break zone to get a sense of where kids were in terms of preparation. And we were very pleased to see that kids were reporting that they were very experienced with Schoology already. But I do want to show you something just really simple from the data we get from our system that shows how well we were prepared as a result of decisions we've made in recent years. And these were decisions that were not made with any kind of pandemic in mind. But if you're looking at my screen, what you're seeing are some of our usage analytics for Schoology. And this is the number of active users in the last 7 days. That doesn't tell us much. So I'm going to go to the last 12 months. And what you see here is that the level of users we have today, except for this yellow line down here, which is parents, the student usage during remote learning in terms of number of active users has not been much higher than what it has been over the course of the school year. And if we look at unique sessions as opposed to users, we see that while it went up some in the period of remote learning, it's not like it was a big jump. And this would be consistent even if I unpack this by middle school and high school. And so, you know, I just want to say that the work our teachers have made and the work our principals have invested and the work that Herb and his IT staff have invested in making sure we had up-to-date modern instructional learning, sensible technology integration, investments in one-to-one computing, intermediate school on up, investments in learning management system. It meant that when this emergency came upon us, we did have some new things we had to bring in, but we were actually building on tools our teachers and students already had some familiarity with. So even though what we did was impromptu and it was emergency, we were building on some good foundation stones that had been laid. And those were things you as a board did and invested in. And I think it's important that, you know, we keep that in mind. Now, looking forward to next year, as you have heard Randy share in his updates to you as part of the full board, we have a lot of guidance that's still evolving. And so some of the details of what we need to do are going to depend on information that we're still waiting on from federal, state, and local public health authorities, Wisconsin DPI. Within the last few days, we've started to receive some more specific guidance, which is helpful. We're just beginning to look at that. You know, Randy is probably better positioned than I am to kind of speak to where we're at in that process. But I think there are a few things, you know, as we look to next year that we know are going to be realities for us. And I think, you know, the first thing is we had to make some very difficult decisions here in the spring about what would get covered and what would not get covered in our courses for the remainder of the school year after spring break. And we had to make some very parsimonious decisions about what was really essential. And especially with the younger children, the amount of the curriculum that we presented was reduced from what it would typically be. That was a little less the case at the high school and the middle school, to be sure. The other thing is we were just focused, because again, looking back to March, we went on spring break, and over spring break, the schools were shut down indefinitely for in-person attendance. And so we came out of spring break in a very different, I mean, we knew going into spring break that there were very dark clouds on the horizon, but we, over the course of spring break, had to pivot from school the way we've always done it to a remote learning. And so everybody's focus, again, with all of those nice foundational elements in place, was still on making as quick a transition to remote learning as possible. And it meant that we had to build up on some tools we had. It meant we had to get technology in the hands of some households that did not have as much technology, even with our one-to-one program. It meant that we had to add some new tools, and we just didn't have time to really have comprehensive discussions about instructional priorities and the instructional model. Now, I think, again, given the rapidity of these changes, I think things happened extremely well. You've seen high levels of satisfaction on the stakeholder surveys that have been shared with you. We've also received some very important feedback for how things can be improved for next year. But, you know, for the upcoming year, we are going to take a more conceptually based approach to this. You know, we're going to focus on making sure we're looking at student engagement very carefully. We are going to look at inclusivity and community building very carefully, so students know as much as possible that they are active members of a learning community. We're going to focus on feedback.
H-E-S-K.
We're going to focus on opportunities for student reflection and staff reflection, and also with more prior planning time in mind, prioritize our learning goals and how we communicate those in our formats to students. Now, we're hoping, and I think it's likely, that we won't have to be in totally remote learning when we return in the fall. We might be, it's still possible, but it's very possible we will be in some kind of multimodal situation where students, unless they're medically vulnerable, will be in school. Teachers, unless they are medically vulnerable, will be in school. We may have to have a very different look to what school looks like when people are present. We may need to have a lot of physical distancing. We may need to have changes to hygiene in the building, protective masks. I mean, we're just going to have to see where this guidance comes in, but it's very possible that we will have kind of a mixed model of students in school, maybe in lower density, and learning at home. And so I think focusing on getting the remote learning piece better is still going to be very important, because that probably doesn't entirely go away for us next year. It's still probably going to be present in some shape and form. And I think as we go through the next month, you're going to see us be able to provide you with some high-level instructional planning documents. I don't know to what extent our operational plans will be able to come together in the next month. A lot of that's going to depend on guidance from other parties of government, local, state, and federal. But I do think that over the next month, we'll be able to share the model more with you. We are doing needs assessment over the next few weeks with parents, with students, at least students above the elementary level, and with their teachers too, to get some reflection, some final reflections beyond what we already have on how the last 2 months have gone, and what we can do to make this better for next year. So I don't really have any schematics or bullet points to give you today. Those will be coming. And I think as we get more information, you know, I certainly think we will be trying to focus on what kids and teachers need to be focused on for the start of the next school year. I will say that there will probably be surprises along the way. We will plan with the best information we have. It's possible guidance may change. It's possible conditions in the community may change, and we have to kind of mix up what we're doing and maybe do a little more remote or a little less remote. And with that, I know you had some questions. That's why you wanted this on the agenda. And maybe not so much questions, but also things you really want to make sure we're keeping in mind as we enter into this planning process. But before we get to that, Randy, nobody's closer to the guidance and the requirements that we're waiting on than you are. Amy certainly has been actively working with staff in many buildings on what we've been doing in the last 2 months with our remote learning. So, Randy and then Amy, do you have anything that you also want to share on the topic before we have the committee discussion?
I mean, I think the place that we're at is similar to what Tim has said, but I think we had some guidance come out from DPI today. It's very much in line with what I see coming out of like the CDC on really how do you start to interact as a school community again, particularly as you have different levels of phasing of social distancing and different types of rules, and how do you start to mitigate that. I would say that some parts of the guidelines are specific, some are broad, some give options. The piece that I think is most important is you heard Tim talk about things from a instructional standpoint. There's also, but it's an intersectionality type of an approach that whatever you're choosing to do instructionally is probably driven based on group size and social distancing rules. And then how you navigate that is also impacted by your ability to make sure you have the good sanitation pieces in place. And then you also have to be looking at things that we're having discussions about. How do you do transportation? How do you do, how many kids can be on a bus? How do you do bus transportation? And there's many intersectionalities that are happening. So it's not simply just adopting an instructional model and moving forward. It's trying to see if you are adopting that model, how do you support it, and can you support it given the other guidelines? You're going to see things on wellness checks and how do you, and I think it's just a matter right now. It's the piece I sent out to parents today said there's certain things we know, there's certain things we don't know, there's certain things we don't have enough information on, and there's certain things that we're trying to figure out how they work. And I think that's very accurate with the direction we've been given today. Our team is really starting now to kind of, now that we have some things to respond to a little bit more directly, kind of compartmentalize some of these pieces and then come together. At Monday's board meeting, or Tuesday's board meeting, I'm sorry, I'm going to give just an update on really what some of these kind of question areas that we're starting to query will entail. And what I'd like to do then at the June 8th meeting is at least start to be able to show you the scaffold of how we are organizing this work. And as Tim said, there's going to be pieces that we're going to be able to have some better direction, or at least multi-level approaches to, given what the climate is at the time. And then I think it's a matter of, once the phasing of the forward DANE plan moves, how do we respond to that? The other piece that's occurring is you have guidance from DPI that is basically states these are not requirements, and you basically need to refer to your local health department. So local health departments right now are the driver of what is allowed or what is not allowed. So that's a piece. Actually, tomorrow I have two quite important meetings. One is a state level superintendent's meeting that WASDA is pulling together, where we will hear kind of the state view of what's occurring and what some of these guidelines are. It'll also bring in the perspective of where does Wisconsin Department of Health Services fall and how do those guidelines get interpreted. And then in the afternoon, I have a meeting with the Dane County Superintendent's Group, where we have a representative from Public Health Madison-Dane County, where we'll be able to get into some more of the granularity of what do some of these mean, what can we be expecting with regards to further guidelines, similarly to how they've given us things on how to close out the school year, how to clean out, how to get kids their materials back. that guidance has been extremely helpful for us then to implement change moving forward. So we need to figure out what is Dane County going to provide us and what's going to be a local decision. And I anticipate, and this is what I'll talk to the board about on Tuesday as well, is that we will have pieces that are going to come to us, and it can be an either or type situation. And we locally are going to have to make some decisions on which choice we make on some particularly important pieces. But as I've reviewed what came out today and looked at some of the other frameworks that are out there, it's trying to really navigate that whole planning landscape, but making sure that the different really tentacles of the plan that involve operations, sanitation, transportation, instruction, safety, all of those, how do those interact together, and finding a plan where they can all be congruent. So that's where we're at. That's there's definitely guidance coming, but there's certainly a lot of planning, question development, and then further answers that are needed before we're going to be able to answer many questions with any level of certainty.
Thank you, Randy. Amy, did you have some thoughts that you wanted to share on this topic?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my Zoom interface looks very different today, so I couldn't find the unmute easily. I can't think of anything I could possibly add to either of those very comprehensive summaries of all of the complex issues that we're working through. So that's the benefit of being third, I guess. Nothing to add.
Thanks, Amy.
Can I share a concern that I have heard?
Mm-hmm.
So as I interact in the community, I think overwhelming, I have heard very positive comments about what has been provided for students. The only concern that I have heard that I do want to share is consistency within content delivery. And I know that that's hard to do when we're face to face. And I know it's something that staff and, grade levels continually work on. But there is some perception out there that there is some inconsistencies among the delivery within a grade level. And sometimes it's from school to school, and sometimes it's within a school. And again, I don't know the specifics. It has been shared to me. So I just wanted to pass that to you. And, it is what it is. It's very hard to do that consistently all the time, but as much as possible, I think we need to try to deliver a consistent program. And the other question, and it really has nothing to do with curriculum, but I've been asked by some people, is will our janitors be back to work soon, Randy?
They're all back this week, so that'll be part of it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we have our entire team back this week.
Perfect, because this was actually a comment from a couple weeks ago. People were wondering when they were going to be given their job.
Yeah, we had to mitigate through some things that I know Brian was working through just legally as far as how to bring them back, making sure that we communicated all of their options to them. And yeah, we do have our staff back at this point. So I will be updating the board on that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Joan, just on the consistency thing, I think everybody would certainly recognize that there have been some inconsistencies, and I think people were doing their best.
I agree.
Oh, Tim, and I know, yeah. I mean, I think the challenge, and this is where I think having the summer is really going to help, is people found themselves having to make decisions they don't normally have to make in the middle of the school year about what to cover and how to cover it.
Right.
And make a lot of those decisions when all of the collaboration was virtual.
Right.
And so I think what we saw was people making good faith efforts within the types of collaborative structures they had, but not always being able to communicate around some key questions, and then you'd see some inconsistency. And I think on the ELA side, this was a case where it's been very helpful to have the literacy coaches. They were able to be that coordinating resource at their schools, and the literacy coaches working with Amy would frequently collaborate across the schools to maintain a greater level of consistency. After a few weeks, we started a weekly school rep check-in on grade level math to try to get mathematics on a more consistent basis. But absolutely, there were some inconsistencies.
Yeah, and I didn't mean that as a criticism in any means, Tim. I mean, I know everybody tried and did everything they could, but I just wanted to share the comment because it has been addressed to me by a couple people as I have met people in the community, and I just wanted to share it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did, and I know exactly where you're coming from on this, Joan. It's just one nice thing about the emergency is now all of our curriculum committee meetings get recorded. They never used to get recorded, so the ability of what's said here to go out to the community is greater than in the past. And so I know those questions are out there, and I just kind of wanted to provide a little context for anybody who might be watching it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I think we had some questions, but I know you're planning on things, and we just wanted to be sure we were going to be supportive of whatever the administration came up with. So if we can be of help, let us know.
Well, I think, all of you, and I think Joan just gave a perfect example of that, you're interacting with the public all the time, and the public comes to you in ways they sometimes don't come to staff. And so really appreciate your role as communicators that way. It's so invaluable. And, you're a very experienced committee. We've got a great board, great committee here. As we go through this, everybody's busy, but if you have specific questions and any of you, just like if we were in normal times, you wanted to schedule a time to pop in and have a conversation about a topic, we would accommodate that. Don't feel because we are in video mode that we don't have an open, I guess open door is not the right thing. Open
mic.
Open monitor policy. But that's always something we always encourage.
If I can add something, Tim. Oh, go ahead, Joan. Sorry.
Well, I think I mentioned this. I think I maybe mentioned it at the last board meeting that I ran into a staff member and there was concerns about the actual hardware that staff had in their homes, and as much as we can do to provide adequate laptops and hardware for staff members.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, our end of year staff survey is going to probe on that specifically. We do want to look into that more.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just go back to Judy's point as far as how the board can be of assistance here. There is absolutely going to be points where we're going to have to decide on a direction, point A or point B, and we're going to need some assistance with that. I mean, I think some of these are going to be large enough decisions as far as how we navigate this, and decisions on, including some of the operational pieces that we need to make a directional decision for all of our buildings. And we're going to want to bring you into that dialogue as you represent the community and hear the voices that you hear as well. And we may need to think about, and well, we do need to think about how do we connect in with the community on some of these, because they're very large discussions and they're impactful on many people. So that's a piece that, again, I'll be talking about on Tuesday as a preface to some of these things, because that's the work we have in front of us. It continues to be like a domino effect. You address one piece, and then a whole nother set of frameworks come out in front of you. And as we start to make decisions, we keep moving forward, and that's going to continue throughout the summer and into the fall as we navigate through this. But the board's going to play a large role in helping us do that.
Okay. Well, Tim, do we have chairs and coordinator vacancies up next?
Yes, and just wanted to let you know we're making very good progress on filling those. You know, due to some of our retirements, we had some to fill this year we were not expecting, but you know, the one that we didn't have someone step forward as of a week ago that was still in recruitment phase. Kurt Ely shared with me a few days ago, somebody stepped forward. So when this comes to you in July or August, you will have a full slate, and really happy with how it's turned out. We have a lot of good people coming back to roles they are excelling in, but we also have some new faces in leadership roles, and that's always exciting too.
Good, good. And how about adoption of textbooks?
So one thing that came to light since we last covered textbooks was AP Biology had reached the point where they were using a text that was more than 10 years old, and College Board recommends, particularly in the sciences, that the copyrights are kept more current. And so what you see in here is an AP Biology textbook recommendation. And again, if you remember from our discussions last time, we were running well under our normal long-term budget, so we can easily accommodate this. This is a hybrid text. It is a very modern copyright, and it is one of the recommended texts for AP Biology. Now, College Board does not absolutely require you to use textbooks off the recommended list, but we try to do so as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I move we
approve.
Second.
I guess that's in favor then? Aye.
Aye.
Or we don't need to vote on it? Do we need to vote?
No.
You do, because it's an adoption that will go to the board at the June meeting.
Oh,
Okay.
all right.
Ayes.
Aye.
John? Aye.
Could we check somewhere for committee meetings? Dave mentioned a long time ago that with Robert's Rules of Orders, we don't need to second a motion in committee. We only need the motion and then we vote on it. And so it's just a procedural thing. And if we can avoid the second, that's great. Otherwise, yes, at times in committee it feels redundant.
Yeah. Yeah, with the committee at 3, it's a little close.
All right.
So we just need a motion and then a vote.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Very good.
All right. And do we have some items for next time, Tim, or have you shared those already pretty well?
Well, I think the biggest thing is based on the direction on our third agenda item, which was human growth and development, we will have to bring that back at some point. I mean, I think and you know, Randy's mentioned this at points in the meeting, due to the unique nature of where we sit in terms of planning for next year, in terms of what staff need to do, and looking ahead to potentially decisions that may need to come to you. You know, I do think anything we don't have to, anything that can be deferred in favor of dealing with planning priorities for next year, we're going to want to defer. I think the one exception is human growth and development. At some point, we'll need to meet again on that. But otherwise, unless it relates to opening of 2020, 2021, I don't think we're going to have a lot of topics that we are going to be able to generate for this committee. Randy, I don't know if you have or you want to add to this.
No, I mean, I think that there's going to be a lot of things like the agenda item on what does next fall look like. Those are things I think we need to continue to take up as a whole board because they're going to be significant pieces. So I wouldn't see those necessarily going to a committee unless there was something that was delegated from the full board to that. So I think some of the large planning pieces I'll try to just take right to the full board.
Okay, good. Any more discussion on anything?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Kim.
Thank
Boy,
you,
you picked up
everybody.
that new habit very quickly.
Bang, bang.
Thank you.
We're,
all.
we're fast learners.
Thank you.
All right.
Everybody,
Have a good
to
night.
see you.
Good night.
Good
Thank you,
night.
everybody.